Every civilization eventually reaches for music. Long before written history as most people understand it, before the first dynasty of Egypt, before the Hebrew scriptures, before the Greek philosophers, human beings were already trying to write songs down, and the oldest people to succeed were the Sumerians. If the history of sound and the hidden science of the ancient world interests you, consider subscribing so you never miss a video like this. The oldest music in the world. Somewhere around 5,500 years ago, in the flat river valleys between the Tigris and Euphrates in what is now southern Iraq, a civilization emerged that would define the template for almost every organized society that followed. The Sumerians built cities, wrote laws, tracked the stars, and invented the wheel. They also, it turns out, wrote music theory. Most people know the Sumerians from their wedge-shaped writing pressed into wet clay tablets, a script called Cuneiform, which is among the oldest writing systems ever documented. What far fewer people know is that some of those clay tablets contain musical notation, not metaphors about music, not descriptions of singing, actual written instructions for how to play specific songs on specific instruments, with tuning directions and harmonic intervals recorded in a system sophisticated enough that modern scholars have spent decades trying to decode it. The Sumerians were not primitive, they were the foundation. The tablets, what was actually found. The cuneiform tablets most central to this story were not found in Iraq. They were discovered in the early 1950s at an ancient site called Ugarit in what is now northern Syria by the French archaeologist Claude Schaeffer. Among the thousands of tablets excavated, there was a small group containing something no one had seen before, musical notation written in cuneiform with accompanying Hurrian language lyrics. The most complete of these is now known as the Hurrian Hymn No. 6. It dates to approximately 1400 BCE, making it the oldest substantially complete piece of written music ever found. The Hurrian people were neighbors and cultural descendants of the Sumerian tradition, writing in the same cuneiform script and drawing on the same Mesopotamian musical conventions. Earlier, more fragmentary Sumerian musical tablets from the ancient cities of Nippur and Ur date even further back to roughly 2000 BCE, and they document a tuning system and a theory of musical modes that predates anything previously known in Western music history. The 7 songs framing that circulates around these tablets refers both to the multi-tablet hymn collections found at Ugarit and to the 7 distinct musical modes documented in Sumerian music theory. 7 modes pressed into clay. More than 3,000 years before anyone living today was born. Decoding the sound. More than 50 years of academic work stand behind what we now know about how these tablets actually sounded. The central figure in that work is Anne Draffcorn Kilmer, an Assyriologist at the University of California, Berkeley, who spent much of her career decoding the Hurrian notation system. The challenge was immense. The cuneiform signs described a tuning system for a stringed instrument called the samum, a 9-stringed lyre using a set of interval names, strings identified by number and by their relationship to each other. Kilmer had to reverse engineer an entire musical language from scratch with no Rosetta Stone equivalent to guide her. By 1974, she and her colleagues had produced the first playable reconstruction of the Hurrian Hymn No. 6. The New York Times wrote of that first modern performance that it had revolutionized the whole concept of the origin of Western music. The hymn uses a diatonic scale, the same basic scale structure underlying most Western music today. The intervals were recognizable. The harmonic logic was coherent. Researchers had expected something alien. They found something hauntingly familiar. The hymn itself is a devotional piece addressed to Nikal, the goddess of orchards and consort of the moon god in Hurrian and Ugaritic tradition. The lyrics are tender. The emotional register is longing, almost plaintive. A human being sat in a city that no longer exists and wrote a love song more than 3,000 years ago, and we can still hear it. We are talking about music so old it predates most of recorded civilization, and yet it sounds, in some reconstructions, like something you might have heard on the radio. Drop a comment and let us know where you are watching from, and tell us whether you have ever heard a reconstruction of this hymn before. The frequency claim, where science ends and theory begins. The government doesn't want you to know what this frequency does to your DNA. That sentence, or something close to it, appears in thousands of online videos, wellness podcasts, and alternative health forums, and it almost always traces back eventually to Sumerian clay tablets and a set of tones called the solfeggio frequencies. The claim, stated plainly, is this: specific audio frequencies embedded in ancient Sumerian music, particularly tones around 396 Hz and 528 Hz, interact with human DNA at a cellular level. Proponents argue these tones can repair damaged genetic sequences, awaken dormant DNA, and restore biological systems to a state of original health. The framework was popularized in the 1990s by a researcher named Dr. Joseph Puleo, and later expanded by Leonard Horowitz in his 1999 book, Healing Codes for the Biological Apocalypse. Here is what the science actually shows. Sound is a physical phenomenon. An acoustic vibration does interact with matter in measurable ways. The field of cymatics demonstrates that specific frequencies produce specific geometric patterns in physical substances. A University of Tehran biochemistry study found that cells treated with 528 Hz tones showed a reduction in ethanol-related cell damage. A separate Japanese study from Nippon Medical School found that 5 minutes of music at 528 Hz measurably reduced cortisol levels in test subjects. These are real findings. They are also a very long way from activating dormant DNA sequences. Mainstream genetics does not recognize a mechanism by which external sound frequencies activate or alter DNA expression in the way these claims describe. The double helix does not have a tuning dial. What the evidence supports is that music affects mood, stress hormones, and neurological states, which is itself remarkable. What it does not support is the specific claim about genetic activation. The solfeggio frequency community has built a compelling mythology on a real foundation, but the mythology extends far beyond what that foundation can hold. Why this idea persists? The psychology of ancient wisdom. In 1976, a man named Zecharia Sitchin published a book called The 12th Planet. Sitchin claimed to have translated Sumerian tablets in a way that mainstream scholars had missed entirely, revealing a story of ancient alien visitors called the Anunnaki who had genetically engineered human beings. The book sold millions of copies. The series it launched sold millions more. Mainstream Assyriologists were unambiguous in their response. Dr. Michael Heiser, a scholar with a doctorate in Hebrew Bible and Semitic languages, published detailed rebuttals documenting precisely where Sitchin's translations deviated from any accepted reading of the Cuneiform. The gap between Sitchin's interpretations and those of credentialed Assyriologists was not a matter of academic nuance. It was categorical, and yet Sitchin's books remain in print. The Anunnaki theory remains one of the most widely believed alternative historical frameworks in the world. The solfeggio frequency claims have followed the same trajectory. Why? Part of the answer is genuine and sympathetic. Many people who grew up in the middle decades of the 20th century watched institutions they trusted, medicine, government, media, fail them in documented ways. The instinct that official sources might be suppressing important knowledge is not paranoia. It is a reasonable response to a real history of institutional concealment. Ancient wisdom traditions carry the emotional weight of everything that modernity has lost or discarded, and the idea that a clay tablet holds a secret that 3,000 years of civilization has buried speaks directly to that hunger. If this kind of deep dive into ancient history and the mysteries that surround it is something you find yourself drawn to, we would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What the tablets actually tell us, and why that is enough. Before the Greek mathematician Pythagoras ever theorized about musical ratios, Sumerian scribes were already documenting them. Before the medieval European church formalized its modal system, Mesopotamian musicians had already identified and named 7 distinct modes. Before any Western music theorist drew a scale on parchment, someone in a river delta city pressed the same intervals into wet clay. That is not a fringe claim. That is the documented, verified, peer-reviewed archaeological record. Wikipedia's own article on Pythagorean tuning notes that the system dates back to ancient Mesopotamia and has been widely misattributed to the Greeks. Kilmer's research confirmed that the 7 Mesopotamian musical scales, documented as early as approximately 1800 BCE, were heptatonic diatonic scales, the same structural DNA of modern Western music, established more than 1,000 years before Pythagoras was born. The Hurrian Hymn No. 6, when reconstructed and played, produces an effect that listeners across cultures consistently describe the same way. It sounds ancient and familiar at the same time. It sounds like something you almost remember. Ethnomusicologists note that the diatonic structure underlying the hymn is not a Western invention that ancient peoples happened to anticipate. It may be something closer to a fundamental acoustic property of human hearing itself, a pattern that human ears across every culture and every era tend to find naturally resonant. The song beneath everything. Stripped of every alternative claim, the story of the Sumerian musical tablets is still one of the most moving things the archaeological record contains. Someone made this. Someone cared enough about a melody, about the precise intervals of a devotional song to a goddess of orchards, to press it into clay with the intention that it would last. They could not have known it would last this long. They could not have imagined a world in which people, thousands of years later, would reconstruct their tuning system on digital instruments and upload the result to a global network. And yet here we are, listening. Whether or not ancient frequencies alter human DNA, music clearly does something to human beings that resists easy clinical description. It moves us, it connects us across time in a way that laws and inventories and trade records, however important, simply do not. The oldest written song we have found is a love song, not a war hymn, not a declaration of power, a tender, longing devotional written by a human being who felt something and needed to make sure the feeling was not lost. 3,500 years later, it is not